Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Talk Junkies, where we're coming to you from my basement. We have the pleasure of bringing Mike Anderson onto the show, someone who has written.
Oh, I threw you off.
Yeah, you threw me off a little bit.
Nobody's gonna understand that because the other ones are gone.
The progressive gene, tribalism, and then currently right now, the conservative gene. Has that hit Amazon yet, Mike?
No, it's still in edits. It'll probably be out in September.
Nice.
So it's being edited. I have an editor, and we're going through it for the second time. So
welcome to the show, Mike.
Takes time.
Glad to have you back on Talk Junkies, man. We greatly appreciate everything that you have done for us and just coming on the show and having such a good time with us and having good conversation. What's going on, man? What's new in Mike's world?
Well, we're going to reverse the tables tonight, as I said before, and we're going to quiz you guys rather than you quizzing me. And the topic is going to be your political views, what kind of political system you prefer. And I'm basing that on the fact that I hear people in your generation talking about socialism, being attractive to socialism and to libertarianism. So we want to dig into, why you are libertarian, if you are, and how you perceive that. When we were recording before, I think I made a couple of misstatements which I need to correct, because I talked about libertarianism in relation to democracy or capitalism. Libertarianism is a special flavor of capitalism. I mean, the centerpiece of libertarianism is making capitalism work better. Mm-hmm. So it's not an alternative. It's a cousin or a different flavor, a different way of looking at it. And if you're a libertarian, that doesn't mean you're against democracy. Because democracy is the voting method. It's whether the people vote for those that are elected, not how the economy is run. So a libertarian looks at the economy a certain way that's different from, let's say, the way that a socialist would. So let's have you guys talk a little about your beliefs and how you got there, how you became a libertarian, and then we'll go through the history.
So specifically, let's start with Jesse. And Mike, just kind of ask him the question. I mean, you kind of already did, but do you want to break it down more than that, or just exactly what you just said? Is that the question?
Well, what attracted you to libertarianism, and what is there about it? Because you had to learn enough about it to decide it was
absolutely
you liked it.
Absolutely. So the big thing for me was I grew up in a very right-wing household that was very fundamentally Christian as you could possibly get, and very right-wing. And I do not line up with their morals exactly, but I do understand the small government side of things, as to where I don't line up with the left side, to where I do not like the federal government at all. I think they're way too big, way too overpowered. It needs to be smaller. States need to have more power individually. So I think just to get a basis of that, and maybe you can, work off that.
That's the libertarian playbook what you're citing.
Yes.
So those would be, if they have 10 commandments, that would be 1, 2, 3, and 4 or something. I mean, you right on the right page there. But let me ask a little more about your childhood, because are both your parents the same political persuasion? Are they equally right wing? They're conservative.
Absolutely, 100%. Do not argue. They'll argue about dishes, but they will not argue about who needs to be voted in as president or their morality. They're very much right on the same path, hand in hand.
And what church did you go to? What kind of church? What denomination?
It's technically an Arminius church, if you really get down to like core fundamentals as far as how the religion goes. So very. Wait, I'm sorry. I need to reverse that. It's the non-Arminian. It's very much Assemblies of God, like Baptist, like speaking in tongues, kind of church. And I'm trying to remember what that other one is called.
You're talking about there's Lutheran, Methodist, Baptist.
No.
Or are you talking?
Well, you can really break down the Christian religion into two.
Or like Protestant and
fundamentally,
non-Protestant?
like down to the core, it's Arminian belief. And I don't want to get, this is a whole nother thing, and I have not done my research in years, to be honest with you, whenever it comes to this. No, but just talking about the church that I was raised in was very much speaking in tongues, laying on of hands, very intense emotional services that would happen. It's very, very involved worshiping. The Baptist is like the best way that I could place it. It was a very Baptist aspect, but yeah. So that's my answer to that. I'm trying to even.
What
remember.
about strict lifestyle?
Oh,
Were there things like, don't? I mean,
So-
the Southern Baptists don't allow their parishioners to go to movies, for example, and they don't allow them to go dancing. I mean, those are seen as immoral.
So to give you the best example that I can remember from my childhood, which was, and by the way, this is almost as hard for me to do this podcast sometimes because I am so much the black sheep of my family, because I'm one of 6 children that the patriarchy of my family created. I'm one of 6, and I'm the only one that kind of 100% believes differently than them. But I grew up in a household to where I couldn't watch Power Rangers back in the early 90s because they called on a power that was other than Jesus Christ and that was evil to my parents, and I would get in trouble for watching that on TV. I could also not read the Harry Potter books because that was legitimate witchcraft. That was the household that I grew up in. And it was very rough for me trying to be around other kids my age and just trying to enjoy simple non-fiction things. And my parents took it very seriously. Now, I will say this. My parents have gotten older since then and have become a little bit more relaxed.
And now they watch Power Rangers, right?
Yeah, no, I think they'd be perfectly fine with watching Power Rangers because now they have grandchildren, and they go and they've watched movies where I'm like, are you kidding me? You're taking...
It's different times, man.
Yeah,
Different
I'm like,
times.
you're taking them to watch that movie. You would have grounded me for a week for watching that. My parents were very strict whenever it came to what I viewed. But what ended up not happening in their favor is my personality is the second you tell me I can't do something, I kind of want to do it. So that was always my personality growing up. I was always pushing the envelope. Whenever it came to that. But that's just to set that up for you. That was the household that I grew up in.
What number of the 6 were you?
The
What
very last one. And the next youngest is my sister Evie, who is almost 10 years to the day older than me. So she will be 40 in January.
So you were the youngest by a lot.
I'm the youngest by a lot.
And you're technically raised as an only child. Because that age difference.
Absolutely.
If you have more than 5 years difference between you and a sibling, it's like you're an only child. Because you don't have you're quarter or a third of a generation separated from that person, you're not going to hang with them.
And they complain to me all the time about how easy I got it because my parents actually had money then because they grew up poor. And my dad finally, financially was well off, and we had a nice house. I grew up very not poor at all, very middle class, very nice house, good schooling, like all this through them. But yeah, they were like, man, you don't remember growing up poor, having to fight over Twinkies, and we like all the other 5 siblings would have to hide, the little Debbies that after, the parents would go grocery shopping, you'd, take one, but then you'd actually take 2 and then go hide the other one under a pillowcase somewhere. They were like, you never had to deal with that. And I'm like, I don't see that, but
So does the libertarianism then come from distrust of big government or some other place?
The main reason, well, my later views in life, as far as me actually being focused on government, and me becoming a libertarian, I think is just me progressing through life and having views on things that are opposite from my parents. Not to say that I don't uphold things that my parents taught me, because my parents are always be kind to everyone no matter what. Like be very kind, be very loving, give as much as you possibly can. My parents are really big givers. My dad He does city union mission, like helps out the homeless, like all the time, which I honestly I don't do. I need to follow in his footsteps in that. I just disagree with him like morally so much. As far as my actual political views go, those I just kind of came around on my own. I guess I'm sorry. I probably didn't answer your question the way that it needed to be answered. I might have gone off a little bit too much on that.
I mean you can reach a point in life where it clicks, a particular political philosophy, and you may adopt it for that reason because you see that as better than the alternative. There's nothing wrong with that.
I definitely owe true to my parents' idea about the government needs to be a lot smaller. They believe in a small government. They believe in focusing on the protection of the American people, like certain things like that, like finances, like how the country's financially run is, and I line up with them as far as that goes, as far as finances go, and how the government should be structured. I line up with them about how every vote should matter, and that people matter. But it's just the morality there is where I really split off and become different. But I definitely believe in a small government.
Well, it sounds like you're conservative economically and more liberal socially.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, which is a common thing. I mean, I consider myself in that boat. I've accepted homosexuality as normal and acceptable, and it should be legal, and homosexuals shouldn't be abused for their behavior. I mean, I think it's morally okay. So, but I'm more conservative about government and economics, like you're talking about.
Now, what I will say, which makes a lot of people in my generation a little upset, is that I don't focus on the morality first, because I think morality will come around no matter what. That adapts with time. What needs to be a bigger focus, and this is probably more the conservative coming out of me, is we need to focus on economics first, and foreign affairs and things of that matter before the moral issues. Even though those are extremely important, no people should be oppressed in any way. If anybody is being oppressed, that is a horrible thing. But as far as the act, that will come around naturally. And this has always been my opinion. What we really need to focus on is more so the economic side, as to where I see this happen on the liberal side so many times, to where they're so focused on the moral side, which in my mind, like I said, this will change no matter what. Yes, there is going to be struggles there, but this will change over time. We're focusing on the wrong thing that's more important right now, which is finance. I've always been more finance driven.
But you know what? The reason for that is the left doesn't care about money. That's why the social issues. I mean, that's what the progressive gene was about. They care about equality, and they don't care about money. And they want to build a big government that will protect everybody, no matter what it costs. They don't consider the possibility that the country could go bankrupt, for example.
And then also within big government, you can end up giving up freedoms.
Yeah,
going
sure.
through and like fundamental, which would become a moral issue in the future, giving up certain personal rights and personal freedoms. Giving up that to a big government. The government just says, hey, I'll take care of you. I'll take care of you. Just, give us your money. Don't worry about this. We're going to let you have your whatever moral issue. Man, we're going to fix this. But just, let us create all this power. And the next thing you know, you're kind of screwed as an individual, which I do not believe in. That's why I think that needs to be focused on more so. The structure of the government, financially, how things work, foreign affairs, like these kind of matters should be more important first off than the morals, even though morals are still important.
Let me summarize what you just said in a very profound statement, which I didn't invent, so I don't get any credit for it. Liberty or freedom and equality are mutually exclusive. To provide equality, you have to take away freedom. That's what the left wants to do. They want to create a socialist environment where the government takes care of everybody, but to get there, you've got to give up your freedom. You've got to give up, which includes your property, your tax money. Raise your taxes, send that money to the government so the government can operate. So equality against freedom.
That's deep,
Now-
Mike. That's very deep because we've had Dan on multiple times. I've been texting Dan throughout the week, and that's one thing that he held true and said to me was like, "Hey, Paul, you better be ready to fight for your freedoms."
Dan's our Constitution expert for those of you
Yes.
out there who don't
And
know.
this is specifically what he just said.
And another thing that, and I don't know if this lines up with libertarian or me being a libertarian. Like I said, like whenever Paul told me about, hey man, we're gonna go over libertarianism, I was super interested because, like I said, that's how I like to label myself, and I want to make sure that I'm putting the correct label on my actual views because I don't care about the label so much. It's my actual views and whether or not I'm labeling myself correctly. That way, people have a better, you know what I mean by that. But I hate taxes. I hate taxes. I think we're taxed way too much. I think way too much money goes to the government, and they get to decide where that gets dispersed. And I do not like that at all because that's giving over power to the government as to where I believe I should be the biggest representation of the government. Me as or the collective should be the biggest representation of the government, more so than just one individual voted in.
Right.
I hope that's libertarian.
That's another quote from the Libertarian playbook.
There we go. I'm like two
You
for
got
two
it- you got it
libertarian.
down.
I'm glad. I'm calling myself the right thing. There we go. So far.
Okay, so shut up and let's have one of the other two talk now.
Johnny.
Oh, my bad, man. My bad. I'll literally step
go.
out.
Let's go, Johnny. Let's go.
I mean, I don't have much to say different than Jesse on that. Jesse and I have had this conversation a million times, just drinking and hanging out in the kitchen or anything else. Obviously, my home life was a lot different growing up than Jesse's was. But all that aside,
What was it like?
mine was very just. It wasn't extreme in any side. It was very just average. Parents got divorced when I was like 11. Dad got remarried. Mom never did. Very standard life. The only thing that could have been classified as somewhat extreme one way or another was the fact that I was very. I never had a curfew. Like it was very much the rules were don't drink and drive. Don't knock anybody up. That was it. They were like if I came back at 4 a.m. didn't tell them where I was. It was fine as long as I got home safe. I didn't do anything stupid, and I went to school the next day. Other than that, they were super chillax about the whole thing. And that has to deal with moving back and forth a lot with my parents. And I've told you guys this, but I moved around a lot as a kid. Like, lived in like 26 different places before I ever graduated high school. Like, moved around a ton.
How many siblings do you have?
I have one real sister, and she is 6 years younger than me.
Okay.
And then I've had a couple of different step siblings, but that's literally from a couple of different marriages. I don't know. That's a different situation all in and of itself.
Are you close with your sister?
We're close in the sense of we were never friends. Like, and she actually watches this occasionally, but I don't mind saying any of this. We were never friends in the sense of where we would hang out, like with the same friend group ever. We never really lived together growing up. The only time we lived together would have been when I was like 12 and she was like 6, which there's a big difference there. By the time we were both of the ages where we're like actually doing stuff, we weren't in the same household. And then like now she recently contacted me about, hey, we need to hang out and all this. And I'm like, it's still weird because like you're 22, 23, I'm 29, it's whatever. But we're both, I love my sister. She loves me. She's helped me with stuff in the past. I've helped her. It's, there's no bad blood there or anything. We love each other. We're just never, we're not friends. We're not friends. We're family.
Yeah. Get it. So now you're politics, sir.
Yeah, as far as the whole, I mean, I would consider myself libertarian as well, except the only difference is and Jesse kind of mentioned this, but I really don't like putting a label on anything like that because I don't think
you put yourself in a box.
Yes,
when
I
you
don't
do.
think that any individual, not a single of the three of us here or you, Mike, or anybody across the world fits into one of those boxes. That's why I've always hated the the bipartisan political party and all that. I hate this red versus blue thing because my dad's a perfect example of this. He's always been Democrat. He's always voted Democrat. Ironically, he's also very what's the word I'm looking for here? Stereotype redneck. Like he lives in a camper, and that always sounds bad when you say that out loud, but it's not. I mean, it's really nice. It's nicer than most people's houses inside. And he likes that because he likes the freedom to move around and do what he wants and go to the lake and all that. And that's the life he enjoys living. He's very redneck. He's probably, and once again, I've told him this to his face, I don't believe he's racist, but I think he grew up in a time where some of the things that are said were more acceptable. Like, I truly don't believe he's racist, but I think he grew up in a time where you could say racist things, and that's never got out of his mind. He's gotten better, but there's probably that little percentage of him that doesn't realize that, Anyways, that's just how he grew up. Go ahead.
No, I was about to say, like, my dad still says, hey, let's go out and get Oriental food. And I was like, man, you need to be careful with that. Like, not like so much, but to call somebody Oriental, like, or from the Orient is almost an offensive word, but not in my old spectrum for this whole thing. Whenever you talk about, it's all in the intention of what you're saying. So if you intentionally, it has to do with the emotion that's back behind your words. If you mean it in a kind way, then it was meant in a kind way, even though other people live different lives and may take that word even from your kind way. They process it differently and they immediately see it as something like hateful. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I need to quit talking. I've talked too much.
Anyways, that's what I was getting at, is basically what you just said, which is he never means it in an offensive or racist way, but it does sound that way coming out of his mouth because that's the way he grew up and those are the words he's always used his whole life, and it is what it is. And he's gotten better at it. I've talked to him about it all the time. But, yeah, no. So, anyways, family life, normal. Politics, I don't like fitting into a box like that. My beliefs are very small government. I've went as much as far as saying that, and when I say small government, I don't always mean how much the government's involved. I believe that the government should barely be involved with people's life. But I've specifically said on this podcast before, we've had an episode about it, where I believe that numbers, like legitimate population, and I'm not talking about population control, that's absurd. I'm not talking about people dying. But population as in your ability to effectively govern a higher amount of people, the higher the amount of people that you're governing, the less effective that government is. And that's been proven over time, and you can prove it with simple, I've used this before, but I'll say it again because Mike wasn't here for this. If the three of us sitting in these chairs live in this house together, and that's our government, we may have little discrepancies, but in general, there's no president amongst the three of us. We will make it work. We'll figure it out if we're governing ourselves in this household. Okay, we add in 5 more roommates. Gets a little more difficult, but we could still figure it out. Okay, now there's 45 people living in the house. Okay, we might have to set up some rules. There might have to be someone in charge of, like, collecting the bills. Now you have a position. Now you have the finance guy who collects the money for everybody to pay the bills every month and all this. And now you take 1,000 people living in one place following the same rules. And eventually you have people who disagree on things. And now you take America has 350 million people living under the same set of rules. Not everybody sees eye to eye. And that doesn't mean that some people are evil and some people are good. People are just different. There's different cultures. There's different ways of life. There's different beliefs. There's different moralities. You can't effectively govern 350 million people. That's just my personal belief, is there's no way to effectively do that. And you can branch it out, and that's once again why I think states should have more power. I think, if anything, the federal should be in charge of, and I also hate taxes, but taxes exist for a reason. There needs to be a little bit of tax. We have to have an effective military that can protect us. We have to have effective foreign trade. Those things need to exist. And we have to have an effective economy. There's no reason that Missouri should have a different currency than California. That gets a little absurd. But other than those 3 things, the military, foreign trade, and the the dollar bill, other than that, if Missouri wants these 8 things to be completely legal, but a different state wants them to be illegal, then that's on you to decide where you want to live. And a state that has so much stuff that people don't like, less people will live there, and then that state doesn't get as much money and isn't as effective, and maybe they change some things around. But then you have actual different, smaller governments. I don't know. I've talked about this before on here, but that's, yeah.
It was interesting to hear your story about the 3 people and then the 45 people, because that reminded me the classic human grouping when humans first appeared on the earth is 50 to 100 people. And the reason it's 50 to 100 is that's the number of faces you can remember. So, because if you have more than, let's say, 150, you're not going to remember all those faces. And the reason you have to remember the faces is to know whether somebody's in your tribe or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the other point about that is, because you're talking about why is government needed, government didn't appear until agriculture did. Because when you have agriculture, you can grow a lot of food and people can live in a very dense group. You can have a city. And a city has to be governed because you're constantly interacting with strangers all day, not your relatives. Mm-hmm. It's a big group, just like you said. So it needs a government. And government started by, first kinds of governments were military control. Like there was a general or a king,
like
and he protected the town. Yeah, even way before that, though. So, and then governments took over economies because it made sense if the entire population is growing whatever it is, olive oil or olives or whatever, you have to have an organization to distribute the product of the agriculture efficiently. So you make, you come up with exchange rate and money and exchange money and sell things and whatever. So that's interesting.
Yeah, that's, I guess.
I'll speak to that a little bit, Johnny. From everything that you just said, and we've had the podcast on it for, we did an hour podcast, and we said, should the United States split into 8 different countries? And just listening to it again and realizing the situation that we're in and how prevalent it is, and I know we're going kind of off topic here, and I'm sorry for that, but everything that you've described, like, and maybe we need to split off, maybe we don't, because look where we have came as a country with 320 million people in 50 different states. For the most part, look where we're at. Before, we've had freedom, we've been able to express ourselves. Everyone's lived freely for the most part for over 100 years, until I got older and started realizing what was happening, and maybe that's the discrepancy. But we've been able to go out and do anything that we want. You can say what you want. You can practice whatever religion you want. You're able to be involved within an economy and make whatever amount of money that you want. No one's holding you back towards that. Can you govern 320 million people? 100% you can, because we're already doing it. We're already doing it. Big tech has came in and basically flushed that idea down the drain. We don't need to maybe split off into that many different countries because we've already done it, man.
You said, can we effectively do it is the difference. Are we doing it? Yes. Are we effectively doing it? Not in my opinion. And I don't have a better, I'm not going to pretend that I have some solvable idea here, like that I have a better alternative, because I don't. I'm not that smart. I don't have that. But I don't think we do it effectively. And the biggest thing, I'm going to get away from politics here for just a moment. The biggest thing, and this is maybe the more liberal side of me, and I hate using those words because I don't consider myself liberal. I don't consider myself conservative, I hate the labels, like I said. But the morality part of me, I talked about how people have differences and there's different cultures and some people just don't get along. There's nothing wrong with that.
No, there's not at all.
People seem to think that you have to get along with everybody. That's not how the real world works. You don't have to get along with everybody as long as you don't hate other people. That's the big difference, not harming and hating other people. And I feel like if you make stuff smaller, you don't have this amount of division and...
Well, I don't think that's really even an option, though. When you have 320 million people in one country, that's really not an option. And Mike, I don't know if you can attest to this back with you growing up and be involved in a lot of the things that have happened from the past to now, but I would say for the population that we have now, we've made it pretty far along, being able to do what we want to do.
But I don't think it works effectively in the sense of, okay, first off, you're not as free as you think. You still, don't get me wrong. We're super free compared to other countries. We're super free compared to plenty of other countries. I'm not shitting on America here. That is not my plan, and that's not my intention. But there are, you don't own your car. You pay money to the government every year for your car. Every year. For your house, everything like that. You pay money out of your check. You pay money every time you buy something. Obviously, I'm just talking about taxes at this point. But there's a lot more to it, too, as well as, California is under the same federal laws that North Carolina is, even though there's different people in North Carolina and California. It's different cultures and different kinds of things. And I'm just going to use this as an example. This is completely just out of nowhere. There's nothing to back this up. But let's say, and if anything, it's the opposite. Let's say California is super against weed. Like I said, this is all hypothetical because that's not realistic. let's say California is super against weed or any kind of drugs of any type, and they're against alcohol. They're like, no alcohol on Sundays, dry counties, no alcohol ever. And then you have North Carolina, who's the exact opposite. They're like, freedom of everything, do whatever you want. But now the federal government has to come in and have a middle ground and say, hey, look, no, you can't do whatever you want, North Carolina. That's not fair for you to be under this and them to... you can't put everybody under this blanket of laws. There are some laws that work, like don't murder people. Don't harm other individuals. But as soon as you tell someone not to do something that only affects them and no one else, it doesn't affect anyone around them. It's not hurting another individual, it's only affecting them. Those are laws that should not take place and should not be blanketed over everybody by our government. That is losing freedoms. When you
we could have a whole podcast about states' rights, because that's an enormous thing in the history of our country. I mean, Thomas Jefferson believed that the state power should trump the federal power, and so that's why he opposed the Federalist party or political faction. But the South the Civil War started because the South resented the fact that the federal government was imposing rights on them that felt their rights should be over. The federal government is saying you can't have any. Here's a new state. We're going to start this state, and you can't have any slaves there. That's the federal government telling a state what to do. And so that is one of the direct reasons for the Civil War.
Mm-hmm. And I guess sometimes it comes down to, and I'm using states' power here as an example, but I feel like, let me finish this up real quick, Jesse, before you chime in. Sorry. Sometimes it comes down to the individual. When I talk about like freedom, I don't even think it's the states. Anything that doesn't affect other people. Y'all remember the thing a while back? I don't know how many years ago it was because I'm not good with time. The bakery that refused to bake a cake for a gay couple for a wedding. You guys know what I'm talking about at all? Remember that?
3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So my thing on that, and I don't even remember the result of it all. I don't know how it all went down at the end of the day.
The case was thrown out.
Yeah. I couldn't remember how it all went down. But so I'm very for gay rights. Yet at the same time, I will actually say that if you go to a business, it is up to that business. So if they didn't want to bake that cake, that's their prerogative. Right. You go to a different business. Vice versa, though. If you get married across the street from that bakery in a church right there, and that church is okay with it, that bakery should not be out there picketing and being like, no, we don't want them here at this church. That's none of your business. It doesn't affect your life at all.
Exactly.
Their decisions don't. And so I think this, at the end of it, it comes down to...
But hold on. Aren't we able to do those things already? Aren't most of those things already in place? Isn't life already taxing? If none of these things were in place and let's say it's just back to basic normals and there is no civilization and you have to live. And how do you live? You have to eat something. Life is taxing. Life is taxing. And I know I'm going a little bit off topic right here, but you said earlier, you never own a car, you never own property, all this other shit. But without all of those things, life is still taxing.
No, just be nice to other people, though. Stop being in other people's shit. Like, let people be happy if it doesn't directly affect you.
If you don't turn on the news right now, can't you can already do those things.
Yeah.
Well, you can already do it. This is what America has built for the most part. For the most part, you can do those things.
And like I said, I'm not dogging on America. I'm dogging on, if anything, if I'm being negative towards anything, it's us as a people, myself included. It's humans. We have an issue where we can't let other people do what they want to do if it doesn't affect, like, I'm so sick of people being like, no, you can't do this or you whatever, blah, blah, because it doesn't uphold to my beliefs. Well, you believe in what you want to believe in. I'll believe in what I want to believe in, and we'll just stay out of each other's lives.
Right.
And for the most part, you can do that minus a protest. If they want to go out,
you can't do that in America.
Well, I think what's also bad is this is the vocal minority that's projecting this as far as what you're saying right now. This is not America, by the way.
I mean, it is, though. We live here.
It's the televised media projected, fueling the fire. Because the vocal minority always has a bigger president than what we do. The president, yes. Than what we do, as far as the common person. Because I don't care what this other person's doing over there with their life as long as they're not harming other people.
But man, that's the problem I have is I feel like and this is why I said this has nothing to do with our government. This has nothing to do with politics. This has nothing to do with culture almost. This comes down to the individual. When you let yourself as an individual, and now this is me being judgmental, obviously, so I'm biased in this, but when you let yourself as an individual be offended and go out and tell people not to live their life however they want to live their life when it doesn't affect you, you're an asshole.
I agree. Is that libertarian?
What? No.
The second somebody oppresses somebody else simply off moral beliefs?
I don't think it has anything to do with politics is the point I was getting at.
No.
I think I'm just talking about human nature here. Nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with political views or anything like that.
We need to get Paul's libertarian views here.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Keep moving.
I don't.
Yeah, you're right.
I'll be honest, man. I grew up without any political affiliation. I didn't know what politics were probably into my 20s, man. Same with Johnny, man. My parents got divorced when I was right around 9 or 10. My mom remarried to a guy, again, who wasn't political. I got a sister, a brother. My sister's older. I'm the middle child. My brother is younger. My brother's autistic. Love you, Pete, because he listens to the podcast, man. Thanks for that.
I love Pete.
Grew up poor. Same with Johnny, man. My parents really didn't care what I did, and that was my whole life, even into high school. Just come home. There was no curfew. Yeah, man. I'd go to the strip clubs senior year in high school, man. On a school night, man. I'd get home at 4 a.m. My mom didn't care. Shit like that. I honestly don't know where my political views came from. I really don't. I don't know what I am or who I am.
You have an existential crisis over a podcast real quick, man.
When it comes to when it comes to politics.
Politics are difficult because any reasonable person, in my opinion, this should be a gray area for you. You shouldn't be so set in stone. You need to be wary of the fact that you're a human being and flawed. At your fundamental core, human beings are flawed, and the one thing that's inevitable is change. Along with your opinions,
and I disagree.
Along with everything that goes on in this world and the universe. Hold on. There's some fundamentals, man. Your
change argument, whatever, man, whatever. I'm not all about your change argument.
Let Paul do his thing.
But my bad.
I think I lean more conservative, with a lot of my ideas, especially just here recently. Just after having my kids, I think that's where I started to look into more politics. I was a debater in high school, Mike. I went to nationals and student congress. I don't know how I did it, man. I just kind of persuaded my way into nationals. I was ranked in the top 200 in debate and forensics in the nation, when I was in high school.
Wow.
I don't know why, it was just, I like talking about the topics and stuff like that. It didn't really have any importance in my life at the time because I was more concerned about partying and looking at women. So that was my main focus growing up.
Like the majority of males.
Yep. Okay, so we want to do a little history of libertarianism now?
Yes.
And then we'll figure out.
Man.
Okay.
100%.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it starts with the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment generated a political belief system called liberalism, which you guys are undoubtedly familiar, but it's now been renamed classic liberalism to separate itself from the New Deal, which is American liberalism. So we got to kind of go through these iterations. So prior to the Enlightenment, the individual was not recognized as important in the human race. Everything was about the country, the king, the pope, all that kind of stuff. So if you were an individual, you didn't have any rights, for one thing, and you didn't have any say in the world. But when the Enlightenment happened, and that's one of the reasons it's called the Enlightenment began to throw the focus on the individual as the most important component in human society, not the group. And so the things that came directly out of the Enlightenment were science. Science got started, the scientific method, which produced technology. Capitalism got started. And the link between that and liberalism is, you may have heard of, I can't remember the guy's name, who wrote the most famous book on capitalism. Doesn't matter. Anyway, so it's the Enlightenment and the focus on the individual, and what came out of that was the individual has a right to sell himself to a company to go to work there and earn a fair wage. He's not a slave. He sells himself. I mean, he develops a skill. He sells that skill. I work this place. I can get another $1 an hour. I go to another place. So he has control of his life, basically. So that's liberalism. Liberalism is focus on the individual, focus on the individual's ability to make his way in life and not depend on the group. Okay, so that's called classic liberalism. Now, liberalism has never had a link to democracy, ironically. You don't have to have a democracy to have liberalism. Okay? So anyway, so classic liberalism, this is 1750, and it goes on until the 20th century. And then the Democratic Party of the United States invents the New Deal liberalism. Basically, I mean, you guys know the story, stock market crashed, huge unemployment, the Great Depression. The welfare state is created to try to get us out of the Depression by Roosevelt. And this was called New Deal liberalism. And the difference was it was the welfare state bolted on top of liberal ideas. So there's still the individual, but there's the relationship between the government and the individual changes. The government is now the caretaker for the people instead of the individuals making their own way in life because they were down and out. So that's American liberalism. So that's phase two. Now we come to libertarianism. There was a book written in 1944 called The Road to Serfdom, and it was written by an economist named Friedrich Hayek, who taught at the London School of Economics. He basically invented libertarianism, but basically what that book was about is he claimed, and I think there's some validity, that welfare state leads to totalitarianism, because this is right at the end of World War II, and he saw how corrupt Russia was, the Soviet Union, and what the Nazis had turned into. So if you create a welfare state government, authoritarian state where the government does everything, you'll eventually turn into a communist or Nazi right-wing, well, it's not right-wing, but yeah, right-wing authoritarian government, which will destroy the state. So his view was small government, the things that we've been talking about. So libertarianism became a label then for people who had the belief in the small government versus the welfare state. This is right after World War II. Now, during that time, the conservatives were trying to build an ideology, because conservatives in the past were only people viewed as people who wanted the status quo and didn't want change. So traditionalists, basically. But the ideology of the conservatives grew because two other groups were added to put three groups together, which formed the intellectual basis of conservatism. The second group was the libertarians, because the libertarians obviously didn't like the New Deal welfare state, so they joined the conservatives because similar point of view. And then the third group was a group of anti-communists who felt the Democrats were too cozy with the communists. They were communists in our government. You guys probably know that. And so they joined with the conservatives also. And those three groups went together to eventually form the conservative ideology. So it's always had, since 1950, it's had traditionalism, libertarianism, and anti-communism as central components of the Republican Party, basically. So now libertarianism, is similar to what you guys have mentioned, particularly Jesse. He talked about some details about it, but I think there's some, a classic libertarian is a little bit different than you guys may think, because the classic libertarianism doesn't believe in foreign policy. The classic libertarian believes that we should have nothing to do with any other countries because it's a waste of money. We shouldn't be doing foreign aid, and we shouldn't be messing around with other countries to try and influence what goes on there. It's a waste of time. We should be spending our time and money on ourselves, basically. But the rest is, as Jesse said, small government, very limited, the basics. If we're attacked and we go to war, we have to have an army. We have to have basic services. We have to support police. We have to protect law and order. And so beyond that, libertarianism is very into small government. So now we come to neoliberalism, which is the fourth of the liberalisms. And neoliberalism is basically a restart of libertarianism, believe it or not. This started in the 70s. And basically, it started because some conservatives said there's too many people criticizing capitalism. And they're trying to destroy capitalism. So we need to take a stronger position in favor of capitalism as essential to our economy. And so the neoliberalist philosophy came out, and it's basically that everything the government does and the people do should be focused on making capitalism work more efficiently, because that is the way our economy has to operate. Now, neoliberalism, and I won't spend too much time more on this because it's, we're kind of off topic, but a couple other things neoliberalism believes that you guys will recognize. First, it believes in the global economy. So it goes beyond this particular country, the particular state, and talks about capitalism around the world. And the other thing it believes in is multiculturalism. It does not believe in borders. So if you look at, why the left supports open borders, and why big tech supports global economy, this is neoliberalism, basically. So I want to go back to, for a minute, if you don't mind me.
I almost have a real quick
going
question
on
for you. I'm sorry,
Sure.
This is eating at me.
Sure.
This is eating at me. I have to ask you, Mike, as an individual, do you believe that us as a country have to have a foothold in, as far as foreign policy goes, so heavily that we do?
Well, no, actually, no. Philosophically, I think no, because I think most of our engagement with foreign countries is to further our economic interests. Like protecting the oil wells in the Middle East, so we give the Saudis money, for example. So, and we have, our corporations are global. And so we do this is part of libertarianism in a way. We're supporting the success of our corporations globally. So that's part of the reason we're entangled in all these other countries.
It's one of the biggest reasons why I call ourselves a non-capitalist nation anymore and a corporate oligarchy, because we're worried about corporations and having their foothold and their resources to be able to make money.
What would you? And I have a question. I have a question eating at me, Mike. What would you say the elite are? What do they lean towards? The absolute most elite people on this earth.
Well, there are probably two types. There are conservatives who are wealthy and were born wealthy and are incredibly rich and try and influence politics to go in their direction, to support causes they believe in. And then the other group is the rich left, Hollywood and everything, who support all of the, environmental, big tech causes, neoliberalism. See, the other thing, and this is part of the answer to your question, Paul, what happened with neoliberalism is it ended up, the NAFTA agreement came out of neoliberalism, trade agreements around the world. What that did is the neoliberals believe that if you're a corporation, you move your factories to where the cheapest labor is. So what do? They all leave here. And they go to other countries, and all our workers lose their jobs. That's the neoliberalist philosophy. So part of the reason there's a backlash against neoliberalism now, which is nationalism, of which Trump is example. Trump ran on America first, and it's America first ahead of the rest of the globe. So we got to find jobs for our people because those jobs have been taken away. So that's kind of like the history thing. But I want to also get into this business about, because it was brought up, I think, by all you guys. I don't consider myself an ideologue because ideologues get in a box, like Johnny said. And so an ism is a box, really. I'm genetically conservative. I was raised conservative and all that kind of stuff. I have a conservative mindset, but that doesn't mean I am fanatically supporting the Republican Party. I try to be a moderate, meaning I try to support. I'm a practical politician or political theorist or something, meaning I like to see the government work, and I don't care what the structure is. And part of the problem with me and libertarianism, it's just, an issue, is libertarianism is almost impossible to implement. Because how are you going to elect somebody? Let's say, there's a libertarian senator, right? Rand Paul. If he went for president, how are you going to vote for somebody who wants no foreign aid? I mean, what's the chance that he's going to get elected with that platform? So philosophically and theoretically, I embrace a lot of what libertarianism is. I just don't see how you can make it work. It's like you can't make socialism work either. And the left tries very, very hard to do that. But it just doesn't work. So I wouldn't vote for a libertarian because I don't see that they could get elected if I thought they could. I mean, if they were a third party and they gave the other two parties a run for it, I might. But the system's rigged against third parties. You guys know that, because the other two parties have all the money. And so they don't let any of the money go to anybody else.
Advertising is what wins elections every time.
Man, it goes even worse. It goes even worse than that.
Way worse.
I think whenever you come down to, man, so like before we had a botched beginning to this podcast, we were talking about sports teams a little bit. I think you can be 100% outright on, oh man, this is my sports team. And no matter who's managing my sports team, it's literally just some colors in a city and is not an actual representation of people because people come and go. Don't have that same mentality with your political party. Just because it's red, right? Or just because it's blue, don't follow that.
No, because sports don't affect anything. Sports are entertainment.
I know, so that's what I'm saying. That's the only case it's fine. But so many times
politics
in our society,
should not be entertainment.
But I think so many times in our society, too many people are just like, oh man, it's red, it's my party, it's a jersey I wear, it's sports. Literally like sports. This is the team I follow. I'm Republican, I'm whatever. Oh man, I don't even care, I don't even keep up with it. I just follow it, I root for it. Here's my vote. And I say a bunch of stupid shit online to make sure I line up with this particular group. We need to quit doing that. But
well, I think that's the point.
No, beautifully said, man. Beautifully
that's what
said.
I was talking about.
Beautifully said.
It's not sports teams. It's not sports teams. This is actually important.
Yeah.
Mike mentioned it too about the whole. That's what I said and what Mike said about not being in a box, not having an like.
When do politics sound sexy? When is it so interesting that you want to involve yourself in the Republican
politics
side?
Isn't sexy, man. It's not the Kardashians,
right,
bro.
Exactly.
That's the problem. Nobody gives a shit in our generation. We don't care about talking philosophically anymore. We don't care about talking about. We don't want to talk, tariffs. We don't want to discuss what the president's doing because everybody's so tired of the fucking bullshit. We're just like, oh, we're just gonna be here. As long as I'm living, I'm in these walls. I
think. But I don't think most people want to talk about that. I mean, you're not unusual in that case. I mean, but politics is so complicated, like these crazy, taxes, when taxes get passed or treaties get signed or whatever, they're hundreds of pages long that 500 lawyers looked at, and the congressmen and senators don't even understand it. I mean, how are we going to understand it?
Exactly. I think when you break it down, and if you make things like that easier, I think they would put the American people more at ease. And following suit with better education, and which we've always talked about. If you were to pass legislation that's 500 pages long, or you pass this $2 trillion deal that just got passed after COVID, and you make it sense to the American people, I think that would go a long way. But they're not about that. So obviously we know we're in the situation that we're in now.
Well, most people say, how is this going to affect me? I'm going to get $2,400. That's good. So I support that.
Yeah, that's breadcrumbs. I mean, they literally gave us breadcrumbs. They're going to give us more breadcrumbs. And we found out that they're actually taking stake in American Airlines and stuff like that and shit like that.
And they get off. They literally get off. And we'll end up paying for it. They don't pay for it. We pay for it. Nobody sees the price of milk that they're going to have to pay for 6 months down the road whenever it comes to these bailouts. Is that not the most Mike, real quick. Whenever it comes to bailouts, it frustrates me so much because I believe in capitalism.
We actually talked about this in the last podcast.
I know, but I have to bring it up. Oh, man, it's just so frustrating to me. This is the most anti-capitalist thing ever, is to bail companies out. This frustrates me. Yep. Why? Why are we bailing millionaires out? Why are we... Let them fail. Let them fail. It'll become restructured. People get to buy it up, and it will keep running. But then it gets bought off cheap because people made bad decisions. They didn't put their money in the right spot. They didn't save enough. They spent too much. They did this. Well, you learn from your failures. You're not letting them learn from their failures.
Yes.
What is this? This is so anti-capitalist, these bailouts. It frustrates me. From 2008 on, I've seen so many documentaries where I just get frustrated over and over and over again how we're financially doing things. Us as taxpayers who have barely any say in this, by the way, we don't have any say when these companies get bailed out. I'm like, no, don't bail them out.
No, it's because the powerful people and the wealthy people have the say. We don't.
It's so frustrating. This is the opposite of capitalism. And I'm sorry, this is one thing I get really heated on. Burns a fire in my soul because I'm big on finance. I don't think we teach finance enough in school. Like, high school needs to be taught finance and the understand of economic structure on how things work. You cannot bail these companies out. It's uncapitalistic. Or I'm probably not even saying that right now. It's so frustrating to me. It's so frustrating.
Well, this situation is a little bit different than '08, though, I have to say, because in '08 there were financial institutions failing, and when a lot of banks fail, everybody gets scared and the economy could tank. I mean, if it's United Airlines, that's different.
We wouldn't have that issue if we were at a gold standard. We wouldn't be so much worried about the banks if we were had our actual core foundation financially restructured.
There's central banks in almost every
I don't want to go into that.
Country,
That'd be a whole nother podcast. That would be a whole nother podcast. You have to bail the bank. You have to bail out the banks right now. If the banks go under, that is a representation of the U.S. economy. I completely get it. That is not how it should be. That there should be a better fail-safe than just rich bank owners making bad decisions with their bullshit, and now we have to bail them out. There has to be a better way.
But understand where this came from.
Give me 20 minutes and a joint, and I'll fucking figure that out.
Understand where this came from was COVID-19 and hold on, and the shutdown of the U.S. economy and probably the global economy. And a pandemic has really never even done something like this ever in our history, has it?
No.
So
there's never been a shutdown.
So whenever something like this happens, there have to be steps taken in order to continue on, the economy, right?
Yeah.
So do you think that the necessary steps were taken to continue this economy?
Yeah, because I mean the Fed had to put a lot of money. They had to put liquidity into the market, and they put billions of dollars. They bought billions of dollars of bonds, mainly so investors would not make a run on the system, basically, because everybody would be selling their stock if they thought the system was unstable.
And didn't that originally happen because we dropped down to 19,000? Was it in late March, right?
Right.
You're talking about like the Dow Jones?
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Here's another thing I want to ask you about, because we kind of got into this frustration with the government. When I get the maddest that I can get at the government, or what's happening, or the lack of control I have, or whatever, and I feel kinship with you guys because I'm just a regular guy too. I don't have any power. I say to myself, okay, I'm just going to live my life now. And I take that part out of it, because you can live your life without the government. You got to pay taxes. You can turn the news off, because too much news is psychologically damaging anyway.
Absolutely.
And you can live you have your family, you have your job, you have your things that you like to do. You can do those and forget the government, because it can get overwhelming. I stopped watching the news about 3 or 4 weeks ago, once I saw what the disease was doing. And it's kind of interesting now, because it's going back up again, even though the deaths are not. So it's probably young people. The age group of the new cases is now 35, the average age. So it's basically young people that went out and partied at bars. And so, but the death rate is very low. So I think it's being exaggerated in the media as something worse than it really is. But anyway,
which is what the
I
media,
have this.
that's what the media always
agree.
does.
I agree.
You're
I
right.
agree.
If you can take control over your life and I said it earlier in the podcast, just turn the TV off, man. Ultimately is what it comes down to. But unfortunately, in what we do, you shake your head no?
I was not shaking my head no.
I got you. My bad. With the podcast that we do, we kind of have to stay up in the times and see what's going on in life to try and shed light on those certain topics. But honestly, you're right, Mike. The best thing to do would be to shut the TV off, man. Here in Kansas City, man, if you're in downtown Kansas City, it's mandatory that you wear a mask. You have to wear a mask when you're out in public, and that's happening in multiple states across the country. You know what I say to that? If you want me to wear a mask, and if you're wearing a mask, you're protected. I'm good, man. Let me decide my life. Man. That's all I gotta say. I don't know where that came from, man. It's just frustrating. I have a feeling.
This is more of a left strategy than a right, because the left believes that there should be rules on people to protect other people, basically. And they feel very strongly that everybody should wear a mask, because if you're asymptomatic and you don't wear it, you can infect somebody who's your age or something, but maybe they have a grandma who gets infected then.
Also, I have this. I have a really big issue. There's plenty of video. I get what you're saying, Paul. But at the same time, if an institution, or not an institution, but a business is like, hey, this is our guidelines, and you said this early on in the podcast, we have a right not to service you if you don't follow our guidelines. That's up to the place. And I've seen so many videos of a lot of right-wing people who refuse to wear a mask and make a huge deal out of it. Like, even if you think it's not very serious, like, I think it's projected way too serious right now. You know my position on this. But once again, you can just be cordial and be nice and be like, all right, I'll throw on a fucking mask.
Or what's after that?
Hold on.
After you wear the mask, what are you going to do next? You going to take it in the butt, bro?
Or you can choose.
Is that what you're going to do?
Some
You can
weird
choose-
progression you have there, man.
I know, that was deep. But I'm saying, what is next, man?
You can choose not to go there too.
Yes. You can do a bunch of things, man. It's a fucking mask. I don't think it's as serious as nearly as what it is. But
is it? Hold on.
You don't need these radical
Jesse,
right-winged people
hold
walking
on.
into a business, like, coughing over everything, saying this is, like, that's so inappropriate too. Find a good middle ground.
Okay,
Find a good middle ground here.
So if you do any research and you see what mask or when you wear a legitimate mask and see what it's doing to your oxygen levels. So typically you breathe right
Jesus
around.
Christ, you smoke cigarettes, Paul. Shut the fuck up. You smoke cigarettes.
I'm just saying that.
Talking
Okay,
about your oxygen
but there's a
levels.
lot of people
You
who
worried
don't.
about that
There's a
first.
lot of people who don't, and I'm just speaking out for those people. You breathe right around 20.
They're literally drinking Natty Lights, smoking cigarettes, being like, I can't wear a mask because my fucking oxygen
Can you
level.
please shut the fuck up? Thank you. You breathe right around about 22% oxygen. Now, they've actually done, there's been a firefighter. He posted a video online, and he goes from fire to fire, or he gets calls and multiple calls from people who are now in distress because they're wearing masks. People who consistently wear masks for long periods of times, they're breathing right around 17 to 18% oxygen. You're breathing 4% less oxygen wearing a mask. You down with that, man? You down with that?
I think
I do it at work. Man.
Do it all day, every day, man.
You don't even wear that kind of mask, man. You got the little chin thing with the screen.
I'm just saying, man, people are breathing less oxygen.
I'm going to chime in.
Come on, be more reasonable than that, Paul. Be more reasonable than that. You know better.
I'm speaking facts. What are you coming with? Be more reasonable? Be more reasonable? Come with me with some facts,
hold up.
bro.
I'm going to chime in for a second.
Where's
here.
the facts?
Y'all can both hold up.
My bad. We need Mike to come back. Hey, you know I love you. You know I love you. Anytime we get in
Come with facts, man. Come with facts. Come with facts.
Okay. Anyways, ignoring all that, I think you guys are looking at, both of you, by the way, are looking at facts and all this. You're having the same kind of argument we've talked about before with like gun control and everything else. You're looking at tiny things instead of the big picture. You're kind of both right here, and this isn't me playing the middle ground. This is me just being honest how I feel. You're right, as in people shouldn't be assholes going in and coughing over everything. Paul's right in, you said it's just a mask. It's just a mask. That's one freedom every bit at a time. Paul, if you don't want to wear a mask, don't go into that business. And don't cough over everything and be an asshole about it. Just choose not to support them.
So simple. So simple. I have regulars that walk up to the bar.
The same Jesse, don't tell him that he has to either.
No.
You never.
No, he doesn't have to. He doesn't have to. But at the same time, if you go into a business and you're not wearing a mask, you're like, hey, it's mandatory that you wear a mask. You're like, okay, you either put on a mask and you're worried about your longevity for some reason, as a cigarette smoker, who's worried about your longevity.
You're getting into the little stuff again.
Yeah. No, like, come on. We can get along with this. We can get along. It's not that difficult. It's not that difficult.
See, I don't agree with that either. You're saying go along, get along. You're losing one freedom at a bit.
Once again, it's such an outer layer thing. It is such a thin layer. It's such a thin layer thing.
Man, that's how it always starts, though.
What are your thoughts, Mike?
Then we're already fucked then.
Well, let me talk about Ohio for a minute. In Ohio, you don't have to wear a mask outside, but you have to wear a mask if you go into business. So, I mean, everybody carries a mask in their car and drives their car and walks into the business, and when they get to the door, they put their mask on. And I mean, philosophically, I'm with you, Paul. I mean, I feel like that's in a way a infringement on my freedom to mandate that I do that. But the reason Ohio made the rule they made is because the governor decided there were people in the state who could not tolerate masks, autistic kids, for example, and others. So if you have a part of the population that can't tolerate it, then you can't make it mandatory for all the time. So, but I feel like it's understanding the disease somewhat, and that there are all these people running around that are asymptomatic. I'm willing to wear a mask to slow the thing down.
Why are we even talking about this? Why are we even talking about wearing a mask? What happened with the flu? The flu's been going on for how long? How many diseases? Ebola, H1N1, forever. Why the fuck are we talking about this now? With all the things that are going on within
can we get away from coronavirus?
Hold on. Yeah. With all the things that are going on.
Fan Paul off.
No, fuck you. Stop. With everything that has happened within the entirety of the earth. Look at the population right now. 6 billion people in the next 10 years. Who knows how many billions of people we'll be at? How does it keep increasing when we have all these diseases? Why are we talking about masks? Mike, you're literally trying to groom me, and I'm not coming at you. We're trying to groom each other into talking about maybe we should just wear the mask, man. Maybe we should just wear it. How about no? How about we don't give in to that? I'm a small majority, and it's going to happen. I'm going to have to wear it regardless if I want to participate in society. I just need to move to the middle of the Ozarks, give me a couple acres, knock down some trees, and build a fucking house with
that's
a well,
your choice.
and I'm good,
you
man.
can do
That's
that.
what I need to do.
That's your choice.
That's what it's coming to, man, because you guys are willing to give up those freedoms. Wear your mask, Jesse. Wear it. Mike, wear your mask. Johnny, wear your mask. I can't.
You realize I was on your side at the beginning.
Probably the most unlibertarian thing I've said tonight is, if a company is like, hey, you have to wear a mask. Like, I had to go to Menards to buy dog food. And I had to wear a mask. I was like, all right, I'm going to wear the mask, man.
You didn't have to go to Menards.
It's a mask. It's super cheap dog food.
So that's a decision that you make then. You're willing to give up something for a comfort. That's literally like our society in general. You're willing to give up
They've done that with seatbelts, man. They've done that with seatbelts and seatbelt tickets and all these other things. Now you're discussing like a human viral disease that's fucking happening, or a virus, which I don't think is nearly prevalent is it's actually made out to be. I get that. But at the same time, man, there's so many other core issues that the light is being shown in. It's either Black Lives Matter or coronavirus, and nobody's ever getting to the root of the actual fundamental corruption of our government and how things are run, which is the big thing.
Let me say one more thing about COVID, and we'll try and get off it if we can, because we shouldn't be on it. It's not tonight's topic, but this could make a whole different podcast. And that is, I feel very strongly that we can't shut down again. We can't shut down in the fall. We can't shut down next spring if this comes back. There's more damage done by shutting down than not. And hopefully we learned enough from this experience of how to protect ourselves better the next time. But we can't do this. We can't. We can't do what
and I don't think we will.
We haven't learned anything because we should have never shut down in the first place.
You have to make mistakes to learn from them, Paul.
I'm just saying, we should have never allowed that in the first place. And just to go back to what Jesse just said, and I'm sorry for a lot of the rants that I just went on, but it legitimately comes down to what Jesse just said, is we don't get to the core issue. The core issue. And that's where it all starts, man. Sorry.
But what's the core issue? You're talking about government.
It's just the hierarchy.
Well, actually, like human life should be the core essential, which is why it's always begs so much of a thing for me. I said this earlier, what was it, in April, whenever everything started, and I said, you know what? I said, you need the lesser of two evils with all this, and human life is the most important thing. And then after 3 months went by, I was like, man, I think I was wrong. Even though you still have that core value of human life, but I was like, man, I was wrong. We should have stayed open. We didn't need to. There wasn't enough. The numbers are misconstrued. So many things have happened. The fact that I have a pretty close-knit social network, and I've never heard of anybody in my immediate family, which is huge, and outskirts of family who have actually contracted something that was even like being hospitalized for it, like outside of the flu, blows my mind. You think it would have happened.
When the flu happens, it hits you in your tight-knit community, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so my whole thing is you always take human life first, which is the lesser of two evils as far as shutting down the economy. Obviously, human life comes before money in finances. So I agreed with the first shutdown. But now I'm like, no, everything needs to be staying open now. You can't shut everything down again. I'm agreeing with you, Mike. Everything needs to be staying open. Things need to progress in the better direction. Because I think all these numbers are horribly misconstrued in all this. But at the same time, I still hold true to a local business that says, hey, if you're going to come in here, you need to wear a mask. You cannot be an asshole about it. You either then take your business somewhere else. That is their opinion. And you need to respect that. You don't need to be an asshole about it. Just put on a fucking mask. It's not that hard. That's what I was saying. It's not that hard for a business. But once again, you're like, oh, I'm giving up so much freedoms by putting on a mask. We've already given up so much freedom since 9/11. Are you kidding me? You're worried about a mask right now. Everything else we've given up. The personal property, all the taxes that are happening to us. This corrupt government. And you're worried about a mask you have to put on that potentially could save a life somewhere. Even though it's a small percentage.
I really feel...
Oh, that's so rough for you.
Jesse,
but you won't go protest our government now.
Jesse.
Come the fuck on.
I really feel like we should stop talking about COVID. And the reason is, what happens is we all argue about it, and nobody learns anything. None of us, not Mike, not the viewer, as to where when we're talking about, like, libertarianism and the government and all this, maybe there's a chance that I learn something, you learn something, one of them learns something. This becomes a big circle jerk of fucking emotions, and nothing actually gets done.
That's a good point.
Now, libertarian would say never close. But a libertarian would say people aren't first. The economy's first. Libertarian would say if you work hard and make enough money to live on, you're good. And if you don't work hard at all and you don't have any money, tough. It's Darwinian. Libertarians have a very Darwinian point of view. I'm talking about a pure libertarian now. You can make it into something else if you'd like, but it's, letting the, if you ever heard the term, it's not the silent hand, the invisible hand of the market operate. The visible hand sets the pricing. People buy things because it's priced fairly. If the price is too high, they don't buy it. The company goes out of business. If its price is low enough, they sell like crazy, and then somebody comes up with a business just like that and competes against it. So it's letting the economy run by pricing, and pricing can only be set by supply and demand. You can't be set by the government. So
but the government's also getting their hands into that. They've literally bought stock into the beef. Like the beef, they hold like an 18% stake in, or sorry, they've imported 18% of our beef. Like the government's involved in that.
Yeah, but isn't that the like prices up or something?
Well, I don't know, but like in the 1980s, there was like 1 million ranchers in the United States, and you go 30 years now, and there's like 700,000. They're literally buying ranches. They're getting involved into that, into what we eat.
I have this weird idea. That I've had since I was like 17, from the first time that I did like heavy psychedelics, which will always hold true to me, is that we are all interconnected, and there is no going around that. Me, you, Mike, the guy on the opposite end of the world in Australia that we'll never meet, somehow there's a butterfly effect from what I do, affects him too in some weird way. I have felt this connection before, which I need to do more psychedelics, which I haven't done, but this is such a beautiful feeling to have this understanding that we are here together. That is what's so important to me, and why human life is important, and why economics is almost as important, but more important than morality, which is what I talked about earlier. It's not the same as morality. Morality will change with times as how we progress. But human life comes first. We are all interconnected. We cannot get around this.
But, Jesse, you realize that concept's only 200 years old. Man,
wow.
Human beings have been existed as a species for 200,000 years, and it's only in the past 200 that people matter to other people. I mean, in the Middle Ages, if you starved, you starved. There wasn't nobody gave you food. Sometimes they would give out. I mean, the Romans gave out wheat. They kept wheat in big silos and gave out wheat to the poor so they could make bread. But I mean, until societies got more the morality that was developed in the Enlightenment and started to look more at who is disadvantaged and who is starving and all that was never looked at before. People didn't have any rights either. So this is a new thing.
I can never get away from that feeling. That feeling that literally everyone is interconnected, and that everything that you do needs to be done within kindness and love. And if everyone did that,
wow.
If everyone did things with loving kindness, then the world would become better, right?
Yeah.
It sounds so simple, and everybody goes, "Oh, it's not even that. There's so many numbers involved. There's so much resources that need to be refined and
we're consuming those resources no matter what."
It's so simple. Love and kindness.
You're very idealistic.
Love and kindness first off. Human life, because we're all interconnected. There's no way around it. Show me something otherwise, and I'll believe you. But I've yet to see it. Religion doesn't even. Religion, they nitpick around it. But no, this is what's true in my mind. Love, kindness, everyone's interconnected. We're all in this together on this spinning rock going throughout the universe. I don't care if it's flat Earth, whatever, it's on the back of a fucking turtle. I don't give a shit. We're all here together. We're riding this train. that there is a final stop somewhere. We need to get it together sooner than later, is my whole thing. And it's through love and kindness, which connects all of us. Just be kind. Be loving. That's always been my thing.
I agree 100%, except for the fact that it isn't ideal. It isn't idealism because we don't work that way. You've seen proof of that in Rust. You literally play a video game called Rust where people don't do that. And I know I'm just talking about a game here, but that's literally how we work as a society. People have an ego. They're born with it, and that's not a bad thing. That's literally how we're born. You have an ego, an id, an identity for yourself, and you mean more to yourself than you mean to other people, whether you want to admit it or not. You can try to be all sacrificing and all giving. It doesn't work that way, and you can't be all kind to each other. I wish we could, and I try to be. I try so hard to be. But at the end of the day, subconsciously I'm not. Subconsciously you're not. You've done things to fuck other people over, and you know it. I've done things to fuck other people over. Everybody has.
Your ego is fragile. Your ego is fragile. Your id is all that. Super fragile. You're scared of it, to be honest with you. Nobody enjoys being left alone with yourself.
That's not what I'm talking about at all.
Well, I mean, a lot of this stems from being in a consumerism-driven society, and we're all about ourselves and about who we are and what we can consume, and like that's just. Man. So a lot of what you're talking about, Jesse, I feel like is very important, but we have been taught otherwise. We've been taught to think about ourselves as opposed to being kind at all times and trying to progress ourselves in that way. Honestly, that's the truth. The past 30, Mike, I mean, how long, I mean, so what year were you born? Sorry.
49.
49, man. So you were there when the gold standard left in 1971. Did you not see a life drop in quality after 1971?
No.
You didn't see
a
drop?
I can't perceive anything that happened because of that. I don't know that.
So, okay, Mike didn't really, because I think that like once we left the gold standard, at that point you see women joining the workforce and both sides of the parents working. College gets more expensive. You can't work at a grocery store and you can't pay for college and you can't pay for a car and a nice house. Like just things starting getting increasingly more expensive.
No, well, women started going to work because men invented things to make their lives easier. Instead of taking the rugs out and hanging them on a clothesline and beating them with a rug beater, they had a vacuum cleaner. So they had more time and they could express themselves. They could get educated and look for work. That's why women went to work, not because of the gold standard.
Well, eventually that was bound to happen, and I get that. But what I'm saying is like the quality of life. You know what I'm saying?
I think what Paul's trying to say is that, for example, I would be willing to, and I don't have the statistics, and I don't even know if they exist, but I would be willing to bet a lot of money that if you look at the percentage of population that can support a household on their own now compared to then, the percentage is lower now. For one individual, man or woman, doesn't matter. Let's leave sex and race and all that out of it.
Yeah.
For one individual to support a household with a spouse and 2 children and go to work for 40 hours a week and support that household and live in a middle class kind of setting, I believe that number is lower now than it has ever been in the last 150 years.
To simplify your statement, both parents got to work now in order to survive. In the 50s or whatever, when I was a little kid, the dad worked and the mom didn't work at all. And they had one car, and the dad drove that car to work. And so the mom didn't go anywhere unless that car came home.
That's what I'm saying, though. I don't think you can do that anymore. I don't think you can live that way anymore. I don't even think it's an option.
Right. So, Jesse, I appreciate your spirituality there. That was beautiful. But it just, and I wish all mankind could act in a way that's consistent with what you were saying, but there are too many bad people.
That's true. And it's so sad that the bad shines so bright.
It doesn't have to be that way. There's a lot of things that we can do to combat that, but we choose not to because of the comfortability that we live. And we all choose to do those things that are comfortable, man. And we've all talked about that. And we went down that road on how you and I and Johnny and even Mike can wake up tomorrow and strive towards what you talked about, Jesse. but we enjoy the comfortabilities of what this society has brought to us. And we choose not to do those things, man. And I'll continue to hold my stance on that. I could easily wake up tomorrow and live a completely different life. But you know what?
We don't do that, though.
Exactly. I'm completely okay with the life that I'm living. Or at least I think I am. But when we talk about things that you just talked about, that sounds very appeasing, but I don't do it, man. I don't do it. You don't do it. You don't do it. Mike, I don't know you well enough like these guys. Maybe you do it, maybe you don't. I don't know.
I think it's another thing that it's beautiful and it looks good on paper. And there's a lot that looks good on paper, but
it's hard.
Humans don't work that way.
They do, but it's hard to train yourself to be that way.
It's interesting what Jesse said, because Jesse really took the line of the left, because the difference, how you tell a liberal or progressive from a conservative is, progressives believe that all people are good. Conservatives believe that you need government to control people because they're not all good. So if you look at the way left operates, the Democratic Party, it's give people money. Let's give everybody a minimum income. Let's give everybody $5,000 a month in the United States, and they'll use it wisely. They'll save some, they'll invest part of it. They'll, reasonably spend the rest. They'll buy a house or whatever, which is ludicrous. They, a lot of people will buy drugs with it. Some people will. So it's just this utopian kind of view of the world that is part fantasy. You have to have law and order, and law and order comes from having laws that are enforced. I mean, there's no law and order to any of these pulling down statues. That's all. I mean, Trump has really fumbled that completely in my mind, because this should have been a show of force. All these people should have been arrested rather than just people watching. And they're starting to arrest people now, but it's too late.
It wasn't so much of, this is how the world should be, because that is a laughable thing. Because the whole big thing about human beings is that there's always conflict, which is progressive and changing, which pushes us forward a little bit, which you always need. Like, let's say we all got super hippie and just smoked weed and ate shrooms. That'd be cool for a day. It'd be cool for a day, right? We'd all get along for a day. But then eventually we'd be status quo, which is not what human beings are fundamentally. We have been... If there's one thing you can look back throughout history, is that human beings are changing constantly. Not like.
Let me ask you something real quick before you continue to go on your rant that you're about to go on.
All right.
For the past 100 years, let's say, since the early 1900s, I feel like the elite have created the change that we are now a part of, because they have had control over this society for a very long amount of time. If you want to believe it or not, but I think that you do, that there's generational wealth that has controlled who we are as a society. They have controlled the change that you are talking about. So how can you say what humans are capable of when we've been under a spell, basically?
It's a big question, Paul.
Let me jump in, if you don't mind, for a second. So,
thanks, man. You got my back. Thanks, Mike.
One of the important things that you're bringing up, you didn't make it obvious you bring it up, but it's implied in what you said. I think as human beings, because you talked about confusion and controversy and conflict, I think all of us have to come to grips in our life with what life is. And it's a discovery we all make as human beings. Like, we don't know how we got here, where we're going, what the universe is, or how long it's lasted, or any of that kind of stuff. I mean, just start with the concept of either the universe has been here forever, or it started sometime. And if it started sometime, what was here before that? How could there be nothing, and all of a sudden there's a universe? So those questions escape the human brain's ability to understand. And so we wake up every day, and part of the description that psychologists have of human personality is we all have a life narrative, it's called. because those are the things that we're used to doing. You know, you're married, your kids, you take them to school, you know. So this life narrative is a script you play out every day. But we don't, life is a mystery to all of us in a way. And I can see why people, it's very easy to think about yourself before you think about anybody else, because just figuring out yourself and your place in the world is hard enough.
Beautifully said, man.
It's so difficult. I don't know how other people get so egotistical and get so self-absorbed, because the more that I know about the more I know about myself, the more I literally am upset with myself. Thinking about, like, let's say my past interactions over like the past year, and I'm laying in bed like right before I go to sleep, and I'm thinking about, oh, my day-to-day actions. Some things came up to where I was like, oh man, I was really witty then. But the majority of the time I'm like, man, this is where I failed. This is where I failed. And I'm just this, all I'm trying to do is become a better version of myself in some way. And all I can do to become better is to fail and make mistakes and have, you know, this idea that I had that I held so strongly onto, but then I'm like, oh man, I was really doing it wrong this whole time, and I have to deal with all these thoughts, which is like super intensive for me. It always hits me right before I go to bed. It's like haunting almost. But it's difficult. It's like difficult. I don't understand somebody who's egotistical, who's just like, oh man, I got this right now. Like, oh man, me right now. That's the best. That's the best I could be. And man, I'm really right on everything. I don't.
Well,
get
they're probably
that.
not right.
I don't get that
because they're probably wrong. That's probably a front, a facade to impress other people, because everybody has the same problems, and everybody has the same conflicts you have to work through. And so you hope that when you make a mistake, you don't make it again. You learn from it.
I love like the Rocky movies. Not to quote a movie, but there was a Rocky. It was Creed. It was called Creed, the newest Rocky movie. Whenever Rocky is talking to Creed's son, and he goes, "The biggest enemy you're going to face is yourself," and that is so unbelievably true. That hits so hard for me. I'm like, the biggest enemy you face in life isn't other individuals; it's yourself. It's always yourself. You combat yourself all the time. Your opinions, your morality, all this, your ego, who you are, how you reflect on life, how you are represented amongst our society, the culture, all this, how you vote, everything has meaning. But man, it's intensive. It's so intense. It's very intense. Like feeling that.
I feel like both of you are talking about in different ways. I feel like both of you are just talking about in general the human experience and psychology and living life.
But nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it.
I mean, people talk about it all the time. It's just nobody has the answers.
Yeah.
It's everybody asking questions with no answer, and that's fine. That's what life is.
But a part of that, Jesse, is, and I believe strongly in this, and it's in my books, is, I mean, you guys know that there's really three brains in our brain. There's a lizard brain, there's a mammal's brain, and there's a human brain. And it was built up in layers because back in early time of evolution, we were some, reptile or something, and whatever it is, I don't even know if they know that. But then mammals developed out of reptiles and amphibians. They became the highest form of life because they had warm-blooded and could live in another environment. So this is an advancement. And then mammals developed more sophistication, and humans came out of that. So, and I mean, it's very interesting to look at how the brain functions because those three parts are there. And the part that's the lizard brain, and people make jokes about, well, he behaved like that was his lizard brain part of it. Their struggles are within us because the lizard brain is all id, basically. I feel like I want to stab that guy, or I'm pissed off. I'm going to, punch him in the face. That's the id part. That's the part you got to try and get control of. So the other parts of our brain that have logic in them and stuff that came later, there's an inner fight in your brain. Just like you're talking about fighting with yourself, it's natural to fight with yourself because that's the way we're made.
So the more just really quick, the more self-awareness you have, the higher the burden.
Yes.
What do you think God
Well,
feels?
No one.
Right?
can
No,
answer
I'm
that
sorry.
question.
I went big
Come on,
philosophical.
bro.
I went big philosophical on you
That's
real
too
quick.
big, man. That's too big.
I know, but it sounded really sexy at the time. I'm like, man, this is gonna sound really good whenever I say this.
Let's ask Mike a question that he can't answer. Jesus, man, that's deep. It's as deep as it gets. That's the question we all ask. You know.
Well, my question back to you is, how do you know God can feel anything?
Man, I think God's just an AI. I think we're all in a program right now. That's
What's
my
the-
best explanation.
Here's the real thing: is what's the difference?
No, we could.
Hey,
man,
I
once
think-
again,
I think
we have like 4 subsets of podcasts right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I think
That Reddit has already discussed heavily.
I think
some way.
subconscious is a beautiful thing. It's hard to interpret what our subconscious does on a daily basis. We can't record it. We don't know what it's doing at any given time, but it's continuously working like a 24-hour clock that just it just never stops. Our subconscious never stops. Even when you're interacting, dude, when we had Neha on and she just talked about how our subconscious works and how it just works.
Autopilot.
Yeah, it's autopilot. Like how it works in autopilot because we're geared that way in our everyday lives for it to work that way. It's just insane, man. It's absolutely crazy.
Well, it's interesting that we're not controlled by logic. We're controlled by emotion, basically. Emotion in the sense that the ancient parts of our brain operate that way. Like there's a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is basically handles the fight or flight response. It handles fear. So if you see something like a wild animal, you're in the jungle and a lion shows up, your amygdala is going to tell you, get the heck out of here. And so you don't have time to think about, well, what are the 5 different ways I could deal with this lion? You just start running. So the part of your brain that does the logic processing never gets used at all. It never comes into play because it would take too long. So, I mean, we have these very basic instinctual behaviors that are hanging out there. They got their antenna up all the time. I mean, you guys talked about disliking people we don't know. Very natural. You see a person that has different color skin, your guard's up because you don't know that person and they look different. A lot of racism throughout human history has been because somebody looked different. Because it's natural. I mean, how many times have you guys walked in a party, and I love when this happens, and there's mostly strangers there. You might know 1 or 2 people, and you look around, you go, well, that guy looks like a criminal, and look at the way that guy's dressed. Must be an idiot. I'm like in a microsecond, you got everybody figured out with no data. Like there's this instinctive reaction based on your perception, what they look like. And, you may walk up to them, they're the nicest guy in the world, and everything you thought was wrong, but you got this antenna that is instinctual.
Yeah, that's wild. You size everyone up within the first 5 seconds. You're right.
You know what's crazy? That's almost word for word what Mike said on the very first podcast we had with Mike. I remember him bringing that up in literally, it was either the first or the second one.
Yeah.
I think it was the second. Because that was the tribalism one.
Either way.
But man, it is spot on. And it makes you kind of feel bad about yourself a little bit with what you just said, because that does happen. Because even if it were like people wearing a Chiefs jersey, oh man, I could go hang out with those people. And if they're wearing Raiders jersey on the side, I want to go hang out with them because I don't like the Raiders. Like the same mentality. I mean, that's obviously putting it very like Cran level.
No, but it's true.
It
You're
is
right.
true. And honestly, that's a really difficult subject to talk about right now. But it's something that should be talked about and something we need to get over as a group of people.
100%.
Well, one of my pet peeves, and I think we talked about this in another podcast, is there's thoughts that you have, and then there's things that you say, and there's things you say to your friends, and there's things you would say in public. And as you go along between those four things, the things you say in public, you have to be most careful about. And so now people get caught saying the wrong thing in public, and they lose their job, or they get criticized or something. And then there's a case where people say things in private, and somebody has a tape recorder there, and they get caught and they get in trouble.
I feel like everything is public now.
Well,
right.
Well, the Japanese equated it to masks. I remember this. The Japanese would call them masks that you'd pull off your face, and eventually you'd get to the core of your own being that only you know. And then also in Shrek, he talked about it in layers of onions. He's like, there are layers. There's layers. And you can't get to the core. You could never get to the core of my... Like, you only see my exterior, but the real me is so fucking far away from you. Even though we're physically here, you will never get to the actual core of me. But the Japanese called it, like, masks. There's, like, multiple layers of masks. Like, the one just meeting an individual for the first time, the outermost layer mask of your face, and whenever you get down to it, even the most personal people that you know never get to see your face. Like, your face. The whole point is masks, and then at one point, it is your face, and that's only between you and you, basically.
Yep.
The most inner of your being.
And that's the point I was trying to make. No one can control their own thoughts that come into their head as a part of this instinctual process. You know, I get 10 thoughts a day or something about seeing a person or hearing someone talking. It might be a racist thought, but I didn't control that. I didn't generate that. I'm not going to express that anywhere because I can't control it. I mean, it's a early warning protection system in reaction to your perception of other people. That's what I'm saying. So to blame yourself because you saw somebody and had a bad thought, like, oh, I bet that guy's an idiot. You can't criticize yourself for that. What your control is how you treat that person. You're not going to treat them the way you first thought. You're going to give them the benefit of the doubt, and they may turn out to be a nice person.
I'm going to very, very slightly, like I can't express this, like literally less than 1%, disagree with you on one aspect. And it's
only 1%?
Yeah, less than 1%.
Make it 30.
Okay, 30% disagree here. And the part that I agree with is that you can't control it because it's been ingrained with you that way because of your experiences, which brings it back to what I was going to say about you saying that you're doing it based off of, you said this earlier, you're doing it based off of no data. And I don't believe that. I think we're doing it based off of data, based off the way we were raised and the experiences we've had. And that's something that you're right. We can't control and we can't change. But I will say I think it is based off of past experiences and data, because if you were to take an individual and let's just, once again, ignoring race and sex and everything else, you have a type A person meet a type B person at a party. You've already got a perception of a type B person because of everything that's happened to you in the past. Now, if none of that stuff had happened in the past, or you had been totally oblivious to it, somehow grew up in a world where that didn't exist, then when you meet that type B person, maybe you have utter fear and confusion, and you're like, what is going on? I have never seen this or heard of this before in my life. Or you have the opposite end, which is where, oh my God, what's going on? I've never seen or heard of this. And there's not fear, there's curiosity. And then wanting to be friendly and wanting to know what is happening because the curiosity part of you takes over. And once again, this is all hypothetical because we'll never reach that point because we all were. Something was ingrained in us throughout our younger years all the way up until this very moment. What you perceive, what happened 2 seconds ago changes who you are in the future because everything we're doing is constantly learning. So that's the only part is I would say that you don't have any control of it, but it is based off of data and experiences, even subconsciously.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I didn't make my statement correctly if you thought that, because I'm not saying there's no data. I'm saying the data may be erroneous.
Yeah, it's out of your control and it could be false data.
The data may be, I mean, if you have a negative perception of someone that leads you to walk the other way and never talk to them, and you forego the opportunity to meet a person who could make your life better, then that was a mistake. So the data, you used erroneous data and drew the wrong conclusion and made missed out on an experience you could have had that was useful.
And just like we were taught to have that response when we're younger, you're subconsciously taught to have that fear. I think that you can consciously, you were taught it when you were younger. It happened to all of us throughout our experiences. I think you can't control what your subconscious does, but I think what we can do as a society and as people is take that moment, realize what we've just done, and then try to fix that and adjust ourselves the other direction as we continue to grow up and the older we get. I mean, there's a thing that, with age comes wisdom. That's literally an experience thing. The older you are, the more you know, and there's no disputing that. The more time you have to experience things in your life. So what I'm saying is I think that we as people, and this is all obviously my opinion, I'm just some jackass, I think that we can take those moments where we realize we did something subconsciously and be like, oh, you know what? I need to consciously try to educate myself and change this effect. It's not going to happen over a day. It may take 20 years, but hopefully 20 years from now, my subconscious thought will not be as negative as it was today. And I think we can consciously make that effort.
Yep.
That's deep. Hey, Mike, I'm going to leave you with one last question, man. And then we'll end the podcast.
Do I believe in UFOs?
I was going to say, you asked him that one before.
No, definitely
No
not.
UFOs tonight.
Jesus, shut up, Jesse. I'm going to hit you in your earlobe, man. We're getting close to the 2 hour mark, man. And
oh, wow.
And anyone who's made it close to
Feels
the
like
end of the
30
podcast,
minutes.
I appreciate it, man. But Mike, will Rome fall again, man?
Rome
Rome as in
or the United States?
Will it fall again?
You mean the United States?
Yeah, basically.
Well, there's a lot of philosophers who have believed in the idea of cycles of governments. There's a famous Greek philosopher named Polybius who was actually kidnapped by the Romans, and he lived with the Romans for like 20 years, and he became their right-hand man to one of the famous Roman generals. But he had this cycle of governments belief, which I think has some credibility when you think about it, that you have a, let's see how this work. I want to get this right. So you have a monarchy, and then a monarchy becomes a oligarchy, and then an oligarchy becomes a democracy, and a democracy becomes a dictatorship. Because when you reach the stage where the people have too much control, then they can be sold a bill of goods by a dictator, and he can take over. So then the cycle starts again. Then the dictator is overthrown, and then you have a monarchy again because the dictator is overthrown by some powerful general or something who makes himself king. So our government's 200 years old. This is a time of, it's the golden age of democracies because almost the whole world has a democracy. It's the preeminent system in the world now, but it's got a lot of holes in it. I mean, the best answer I can give you is yes, because all governments cycle. 100 years from now, there may not be any democracies. Who knows? It depends. I mean, the proof of whether a political system can survive or not is whether it can govern. And if our government loses the ability to govern, it will fall because the people will want something else. When enough people are unhappy, or enough people are starving, or enough people are frustrated, or whatever, they'll ask for something else.
Awesome, man.
So,
thank you.
And I mean, and the other thing is, let me just say one more, postscript on that. Everything becomes corrupt sooner or later, no matter what it is. Governments become corrupt, corporations become corrupt, because there's something in human nature that, something, an entity reaches a peak, a government reaches its peak. I don't know whether ours was at the turn of the 20th century or when, or maybe after World War II, because we became a world power. But then it goes downhill because, I mean, let me use the example of unions. Maybe this is a better example. Unions started out and became an important part of our society because they acted for workers to get workers better wages. And then they were victims of their own success because they built the middle class out of people who were paid well enough to rise up and go to the middle class. But as the unions accomplished benefits for the workers, they became less and less important benefits. Because if you got the guy's hourly rate fixed and you got his pension fixed and you got his health care fixed, what's left? So it becomes a law of diminishing returns, and then the unions all became corrupt because all they could do is get bought off to try to get benefits that didn't mean that much to the workers anymore. The auto workers became conservatives because now they had money in the bank. So, they didn't like communism anymore. They became conservative. So anyway, you can't, and I don't think corruption's reversible in anything. What you have to do is you just have to start over. I mean, like Jesse made the point about, United Airlines would be better off crashing, being bankrupt, and being built again from scratch because it would be more efficient. So, how do you reverse corruption? I don't think you can because it's human nature to carry on. I mean, people get comfortable where they are. They're making a lot of money.
No, what you're literally talking about is the hierarchy and the issue within that is that human beings are flawed and that over a long enough period of time, I've said this so many times in this podcast, over a long enough period of time, you restructure government, over a long enough period of time, people come into power, it becomes corrupted. Whether it's 100 years, 500 years, eventually the same thing happens because people are corruptible, we're flawed individuals. This is almost our destiny.
I would just disagree with all of everything that you said and Mike said because the past 100 years we've been force-fed. We've been force-fed like raviolis every day that are 99 cents at the supermarket, a certain topic or a certain subject, and we're taught a certain thing, and this is just all we've ever known, at least for within the past 100 or 200 years. I don't know, whatever. We've all been taught that as a nation. As a nation,
fix humanity.
As a nation, I'm just saying, as a nation, we've been taught that. Maybe if we were taught something different, maybe if the United States went a different route and was taught something different, maybe it would be different. That's all I'm saying.
It sounds so dismal, but it's not.
No, what we talk about is dismal. Sorry. But Mike, I think we're going to end it on there, man. You guys can check Mike out. Search Mike Anderson on Amazon. You can search The Progressive Gene. You can search Tribalism. And he's coming out with his new book. Like he said, it's going to come out in September 1st, right?
No, don't have a date yet.
Okay,
well,
September. Don't hold him to anything here.
Yeah, sorry, man. But he is coming out with a new book this year called The Conservative Gene, man. I highly suggest you guys hit these books up on Amazon, man, because eventually Mike, he has words of wisdom. He has great words. You've seen him on the podcast multiple times and all the great things that he has to say. Check him out on Amazon. We'll put it in the links below where you guys can find that book. You see it right here. All you got to do is look for those.
Just type in those.
JFK and Tesla.
Yeah.
And Joe Montana.
And buy Mike's book, man. And Mike, thank you for joining Talk Junkies, man. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Love having you on.
Yes,
all right.
Learn something.
See you later.
Yep. Have a good night, sir.
See you.
I always enjoy having Mike on.
I love Mike Anderson. I have the most fun with those podcasts than any other podcast.
We do, man. There's a lot of good things that were said in that podcast, and I truly appreciate Mike Anderson, man. And how I found him, I don't know if I have ever told anyone. I was literally looking up ancient blogs.
Ancient history
blogs. And it was on a Google search, and I went down a little bit, clicked on one, and it was literally Mike Anderson's blog. Hit him up on his profile on there, emailed him. He then was kind of interested, gave me his number, and we had a phone conversation for over an hour of what Talk Junkies was about and who Jesse was at the time and Johnny. And, dude, it's just crazy, man. It's crazy, Mike. Thank you.
I feel more comfortable with Mike. Like, I could sit down and have a phone conversation with Mike as to where I couldn't do that with anybody else we have on the podcast. I love Mike Anderson. I love Mike Anderson.
I enjoy Mike. There's phone conversations I could have with a couple of other people we've had on.
Man, I've always
So
talked
again,
Mike
hey,
up so much.
We're getting close to 2 hours.
That's crazy.
If you got just anything that you read within the podcast, and I should have said it at the very beginning of the podcast, is please comment on anything that you've heard or listened to within the podcast that you question and you have questions about. Mike listens to every podcast. He would literally answer any of your questions that you guys have in the comment section on YouTube. If not, I'm almost positive he would probably give you his email, or I'm not positive, but he would answer your questions is what I'm saying.
Or we can have him answer him the next time that he's on the podcast.
Exactly. He loves feedback is what I'm saying. He's very critical about the information that he provides. Literally after the podcast tonight, he'll most likely send me an email about a certain subject that maybe he had misrepresented or any of us, and then give information towards that. So he's very thorough on his research. So please comment on this video. Hit that like button. Hit the subscribe button to all our junkies out there.
Stay fly and ring the bell.